If you get discouraged by all the name dropping and title dropping that I'm doing, don't be. We are going to go slowly for 3 weeks starting next week. We'll talk about the history, the very, very brief history of the musical theatre. And I do not expect you to know all those shows and all those titles. If you're interested, there is a lot to see and explore, and I hope this course will be just the beginning of a beautiful adventure that can actually last for a lifetime. If you just want a gist, watch the recommended shows, and you don't have to elaborate on that so much, so don't be discouraged. Back to the structure, a typical structure of the musical, because over the years, especially in theatre productions, they developed a very stable structure that has continued for decades, and it has become something of a convention that the audiences expect and that the creative people, the creative teams need to consider. So they might decide to break with the convention, but at least they have to know the convention. So usually stage musicals have a 2-act structure with 1 intermission. It's usually between an hour and a half and 3 hours, usually around 2.5 hours in length. The first act is almost always longer, and it almost always introduces all characters and all tunes, all music, which will later be reprised, repeated, reworked, but the audience will know the tunes already from the first act. So a bit of technical language. There is the book, especially in the book musical, so it's like the script or the libretto of the show, which includes all the words. So the dialogue, the spoken dialogue, if it's there, the sung words, if it's sung through, plus the stage direction hints. So some indications what the actors are supposed to do. If we have a fuller version, like a printed version of music and lyrics, this is called a score. A score of the musical is the information mostly for people who can read music, so the musicians in the orchestra and perhaps singers, many of them know how to read the musical notations. So this is the difference between the book and the score. The book includes the words plus stage directions. The score includes the lyrics of the songs, not necessarily the spoken dialogues, very often it is omitted, and the music, the notations for the music. So very often there is an overture, so the curtain raiser when the performance starts, just to let the audience settle in their chairs and basically get into the mood of the performance. Very often it introduces the musical motifs of the show. Again, a very popular feature is to have like another shorter overture after the intermission, the entr'acte music. So when the audience returns from the intermission, there is a short instrumental recapitulation of the tunes from the show. And something that has always slightly shocked me, there is the exit music, the walkout music. When the show ends, when the curtain goes down and there are the curtain calls and everybody applauds, and there might be an encore, so a reprise of some tune, especially if the evening was very successful and everybody is very happy, including the performers. Then the audience start to walk out, but the orchestra continues playing. They play the main tunes from the show again as the people actually walk out. This is something that has always shocked me, perhaps because I like opera, and you never ever walk out of the theater while the music is still playing. So I'm usually one of the last people to leave the room because I wait for the orchestra to end their part and I applaud them as well. So, but this is something very typical for theatrical productions of musicals, the exit music or the walkout music. There are different types of songs, and we are going to meet and discuss different types of songs as we go along. Last week I think I mentioned a novelty song, so a surprising song, a witty, very often humorous song that uses something unusual, either in the music, like in the tune, for example, a very quick tempo, or in the lyrics, like unusual rhymes. But another very popular and almost kind of expected type of song in the musical is a showstopper, or an 11 o'clock number, as it's sometimes called. It means the song that is considered by the creators as the best achievement of this show, probably something that can have a life outside of the show, so something that would be covered by many artists in concerts, not necessarily related to the entire performance. So if you think, for example, that the classical showstopper is Memory from Cats. It's been reprised and covered by many artists, and most people have heard it, and not many people who know the tune realize that it is sung by a cat. Now probably more do after this very, very publicized flop of a film, but there are many songs like that. The songs that have a life of their own, and they are like the culmination of either a plot line or a character arc in the story, or a resolution of the conflict in the musical. Usually they are in the second act, towards the end of the show. Not always. Actually, for example, Don't Cry for Me, Argentina is not positioned at the end of the show, but this is like the memorable tune, the big number. What else? The kind of music that is preferred in musicals. Well, it's hard to say. Nowadays musicals use a lot of popular kinds of music. It could be rock music, it could be pop music, it could be just some sort of nice, light, popular music. It could be rap music, so we have examples for all kinds of genres. Initially, when we talk about the beginning of the musical, especially the Broadway musical, the very important characteristics of a good musical tune was hummability. So something that is melodious, something that you can actually hum walking out of the theater, something that sticks to your head. This is what was traditionally expected. Of course, it was challenged first of all by rock musical in the 1960s, and we are going to talk about that quite a lot. There is a concept of a run. of a musical. It means how many shows are performed before the title closes. So on Broadway, there are long run. If you can say this show had a long run on Broadway, it means it had more than 500 performances in succession. Then they go out forever or for a while. If they are successful, they can be revived. So there are revivals of shows, which means old titles that are brought back to the stage for an additional run, which could also be long. The longest run, if I remember correctly, was something like 42 years. So thousands and thousands of performances. We'll talk about it when we talk about the history of the musical genre. So, yep. There is a proverb among theatre people that when the emotion becomes too strong for speech, you start singing. When it becomes too strong for song, you start dancing. And this is perhaps the reason why we have music and dancing in the musical. They convey emotions. Some say another popular, quite stereotypical saying is that songs very often denote love and intimacy, and dancing very often denotes sex. So it's kind of sex appeal and sexiness. It's not true for all musicals and for all users of song and dance, but for many it is. So speaking of dancing in the musical, it has some conventional styles. Of course, you can use stylized ballroom dancing and stylized ballet dancing. Of course, these are the styles that did not originate with the musical theatre, but they were very popular. A popular type of the positioning of a dancing scene in the musical, usually in the second act, is to include a dream ballet. A dream ballet, something that you will see in Oklahoma, for example. Some say it originated in Oklahoma. We have characters falling asleep and thinking about some problems they have and expressing it through dance. So we have this kind of more, I would say, dreamy landscape, and that is why there is no singing, there are no words, it's just music and movement. You have many examples of the shows that use the dream ballet. For example, Dancing in the Rain has a long, several minutes long scene of the dream ballet. We also have all kinds of jazz-inspired dancing, especially the so-called hot dancing, which originated in the 1920s in America in jazz clubs. As jazz itself was the legacy of the African Americans. Another type of dancing going back to the African Americans was the so-called cakewalk, with like a funny strut, which you can sometimes find especially in the musicals set in earlier times. What else? The chorus line. The chorus line is very typical for the early Broadway vaudevilles and revues. So you have a line of dancers, could be, very often was, young women, pretty and dressed in skimpy clothes. They are dressed the same and they do dance numbers which is coordinated. Everybody is doing the same movements. They sometimes provide a backdrop to a soloist who is doing a song Sometimes they walk down the stairs. This is a very traditional way of using dance in the musical. Then, of course, there is tap dancing, so a very rhythmic dancing, which makes the sound by tapping the shoes. And of course, the masters of tap dancing can almost make music by the use of their feet. We have quite a lot of that, especially in classical musicals, but what's the name of this? Bring in the funk or something. I have to Google it. I haven't seen it, only small fragments. There is a modern musical just a few years ago, which is almost entirely based on tap dancing. So if you like this kind of dancing, it's still inspirational. It's not only something that you can find in, I don't know, Dancing in the Rain or some old musicals of Cole Porter from the 1920s, but later as well, it's still inspirational. For those actors who are not really dancers, but the role requires them to do some dancing nevertheless, there's a special type of dancing called soft shoe dancing. It's a kind of stylized dancing, kind of movement, simple movement for those who are stronger singers than dancers. Plus, some shows include elements of acrobatics. There's a very good show called Pippin, for example, about a young man who tries to find his way in the world, and he meets various people. He's inspired by various lifestyles. It's kind of fairy tale set in the imagined Middle Ages, and the backdrop for this is the circus performance. So we have some dancing done in a way of acrobatics, and this has been quite popular, especially if the musical is set among circus performers, like The Greatest Showman, the film The Greatest Showman. It uses acrobatics as well. Probably not all of it real physical feats, but some CGI, but well, that's true. What else about the typical elements of the musical? We will meet the examples, we'll discuss the examples as we go along. So after we are finished with the history of the genre, we start analyzing some shows, like 2 shows a week with some extras perhaps. But there's one more thing I would like to mention, and namely that musicals, especially Broadway musicals, are and have always been a big business. And the most important aim of making a musical was to generate the profit. These are expensive productions, so the role of the manager, the role of the producer has always been very important in the musicals. And there is one more aspect that traditionally, and I guess it's still valid, generates profits. That is the stars. Musicals are very often, have always been, star vehicles. So they are meant to promote famous actors, famous performers, or they can catapult a performer to stardom. So just a few names of musical stars from the history of musical theatre until today, and there are, of course, talented young people coming in all the time, so the list is very, very far from being complete, but these are some names that you may want to remember or start to familiarize yourself with when we talk about the history of the genre. There will be more names, so just to get you started. So let's say some female stars first. Names like Julie Andrews, Petula Clark, Bernadette Peters, Elaine Page, Patti LuPone. She is still a very, very active performer. Marty Webb, Barbara Cook, Liza Minnelli, Sarah Brightman, Leah Michelle, Idina Menzel, or Kristen Chenoweth. Some of them, like especially the last few ones, are still active performers. They do concerts, they do shows, they get awards or everything. As far as men go, of course there were as many male musical stars as there were female musical stars, but some names that you may remember, just a few to get you started. Fred Astaire, the great dancer, and his great rival Gene Kelly, from the early years of the musical. From slightly more recent times, probably names to remember: Michael Crawford, Hugh Jackman, Neil Patrick Harris. We could go on, just a few names. The performers are definitely not the only stars, because sometimes people get lured into the theater or the cinema to see the work of famous composers or composer and lyricist teams. So again, some names just to get you acquainted: Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, Richard Rogers and Oscar Hammerstein. So this is the team. And another team, Lerner and Lowe, the people behind My Fair Lady, for example. Kander and Ebb, people behind Cabaret, for example. George Gershwin, Leonard Bernstein, and those who are still active, Stephen Sondheim and Andrew Lloyd Webber. These are the grandmasters of musical theatre right now. Andrew Lloyd Webber had a successful, rather long collaboration with the librettist Tim Rice. Later he collaborated with other librettists. Stephen Sondheim is usually both a librettist and a composer, so many of his shows he just created one-handedly. And the recent star, the recent golden child of musical theatre, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the man behind Hamilton, a composer, lyricist, actor, all-around musical star. So that's basically it, and now we can move to Showboat, which I hope you have seen.